All right, we are live. Welcome, everyone. My name is Tom Kramer. I'm the Executive Director of Virginia 21, and welcome to another version of our Virginia News Roundtable with Virginia 21, where we talk about issues facing students and issues facing higher ed in Virginia the last month. With us, we've got Frank Maraca from George Mason University. He's the Executive Editor, the Fourth Estate. He's graduating pretty soon, so he won't be with us anymore. We also have Jacob Stolniker. He's Virginia 21 at William & Mary. So both of you, thanks for joining us.
Sure.
Thank you.
And I'm also in the news this month. Actually, this week we had a big issue develop. So we've asked Brittany Anderson from the Attorney General's office to come talk to us about what the Attorney General did that definitely has an impact on students in Virginia and certainly our colleges. Just to give Brittany a quick introduction, because I know we appreciate her for taking the time for being here. She originally got involved in Virginia 21 before she got into Virginia politics. She started at, I believe, Southwest Virginia Community College and then transferred to Virginia Tech, and she was very active in Virginia 21 at Virginia Tech. And then from there, you know, she has worked in Virginia government for Delegate Joe Morrissey, and then she was a legislative aide, I believe, for then Senator Mark Herring, and now she does legislative work for the Attorney General, Mark Herring. So, Brittany, thanks so much for being with us, and if you wouldn't mind, so let us know what the AG did this week.
Yeah, sure. So, as you may or may not have seen on Tuesday morning, the Attorney General announced that he has sent a letter to our public universities, colleges, community college system, and State Council of Higher Education of Virginia, advising them that based on the legal analysis that he and his team have done of the current federal and state statutes, that Dreamers or students that have qualified for deferred action or DACA do qualify for in-state tuition.
I mean, that's nothing less than big news. I mean, there's always a lot of legislative advocacy that happens, at least the last few years, trying to change the understanding of the law. And it's, I mean, it's fair to say that the previous Attorney General did not come to that conclusion or other conclusions, as the case may be.
Yeah.
So, you know, this is an issue that Virginia 21 has basically stood for. I mean, this past year we definitely advocated for, you know, the Virginia version of the DREAM Act to pass, and we've worked with legislators from Delegate Tom Rust and Alfonso Lopez to make this a reality. And unfortunately, you know, it sort of always comes up short in the House. So, you know, we certainly appreciate the Attorney General's action on this. You know, why did he, like, you know, why is this such a focus for the AG? Why did he do this?
Well, you know, when he was in the Senate and when he was campaigning for this position, he was approached by a lot of people, a lot of young people, students, parents, legislators, business leaders who realized this is an economic and competitiveness issue, and this, you know, this was something that he took a long, hard look at, and, you know, based on his analysis of the current statute, he came to the conclusion that this is the right thing to do.
Yeah, and I'll jump in too and say that the main reason that Virginia 21 is supportive of the DREAM Act is it's I mean, it's twofold, as you just said. It's an access issue. It's making sure that people have access to good quality higher education in Virginia, and it's also a workforce issue. A lot of businesses depend on you know, students to come in highly qualified to get good jobs, and this is an example of not having the DREAM Act in Virginia prevents us from, you know, basically educating highly qualified people. So, you know, that's why Virginia 21's been supportive of it. You know, I want to turn it over now to Frank and Jacob. I know you guys have a couple of questions about this. I know you saw it in the news this week. Why don't we go ahead and start with you, Frank?
Yeah. So, I mean, just kind of on a broad level, I mean, does this like legal action kind of, I mean, does it bar universities from rejecting DACA students from being in-state students, or does this basically say that you know, like even if, I know that universities are supportive of this pretty much across the board, and I can't imagine that they would turn down DACA students after the legal opinion. But does this kind of block them from doing that if they were to?
No, not necessarily. I mean, to qualify for the in-state tuition and for DACA, to qualify for DACA, you have to gain admission to an institution of higher education first.
Sure. I see.
No, but I guess I mean to clarify, is there anything that stands in the way of a university in Virginia from offering in-state tuition to these students? I mean, is it? I haven't heard an indication that they plan not to offer it. Brittany, is the indication that the AGs received that the colleges are going to follow the opinion and move forward?
The indication is, it's under our understanding. Our understanding is that they will. I mean, this is the advice that the colleges and universities as part of our job, and so this is the advice that we're giving to our client agencies, and we hope that they follow it.
Great. What about you, Jacob?
Yeah. So my question is a little more about the politics of this as opposed to the policy. So there's been a lot of speculation as to what this sort of action by the office means in terms of the 2017 governor's race. Does this mean, obviously, that Mark Herring's going to be running for governor?
It would be premature for me to comment on something like that.
Fair enough.
Thank you for asking.
And that's always a fun comment. I mean, punditry starts the day after the day after an election. So, always a good question. So, Brittany, I've got a question. This is, and I think that this could have been, expected in some circles, but how does this play into the notion that some Republicans see that the Attorney General is, basically being the liberal activist to Ken Cuccinelli's conservative activist? I mean, how is the office responding to that criticism from folks like? I mean, I saw today the delegate Bob Marshall, who always has very colorful comments. That he basically said that the Attorney General was, Sar Herring today.
The Attorney General is just doing what's within his authority to do, and he's just doing his job. Like I said, he had this question asked to him by a number of legislators, a number of young people and parents and people from the business community, and it was something that we felt it was important for our office to advise on.
Well, let me be one of the first people at Virginia 21 to say, as I expressed to you earlier, that we're certainly supportive of his action. A lot of money is invested in these students from the public K through 12 side, and this move on the Attorney General's part helps actualize that investment and helps these students take advantage of further investment. So it's maximizing our dollars and our talent in terms of people. So.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as you saw on Tuesday from the Attorney General's remarks, the DACA students are students that have lived in Virginia for 10 to 15 years. They graduated from Virginia schools. They've gained admission to the public schools, and they know no other home other than Virginia. So it's silly for us to put a stop sign at the end of their completion of high school.
Great. Well, Brittany, thanks for joining us today. We appreciate your time. We know you've got the Attorney General keeps you very busy in the office, so thanks for joining us, and we'll talk to you soon. And also let him know that we appreciated his comments very much when he attended our leadership luncheon last week. So we're getting a lot of AG action in the last few weeks, so we appreciate that.
And thank you. I would be remiss if I didn't thank you again. He asked when I came over here that I express our gratitude for having us. He really enjoyed speaking to you all and meeting the students, and we hope that we can continue to work together throughout our administration.
Great. Thanks so much, Brittany.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right, Frank and Jacob. Now I appreciate Brittany for hopping on, but I do want to spend a little time doing the 2017 I don't know what they call it on TV, but talk a little bit about the race for governor. Jacob, what do you think this says about the moves an Attorney General can make? The moves an Attorney General can make versus the moves a Lieutenant Governor can make. A lot of people expect there to be a primary contest between the Attorney General and the LG.
Right. So I think the main distinction is that the Attorney General can take sort of affirmative, can in a direct way sort of affect policy, and as opposed to the Lieutenant Governor, who the best way he can affect policy is when there's a tie in the Senate. Doesn't really have control over the direction of any specific mechanism for enacting policy on his own. But he is the tie-breaking vote. That's sort of the asset that the lieutenant governor has. The attorney general again can do things like write opinions for and take things to court which wouldn't otherwise be taken to court. So like the gay marriage amendment, changing the opinions on that. So
no, that's and well, I was going to turn to Frank and say to you that the lieutenant governor, the fact that the LG is the tie-breaking vote, that basically caused the shift in power in the Senate that has given that's given the Senate Democrats a chance at passing a version of the Medicaid expansion, isn't? I mean, so the LG isn't insignificant.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, but I mean, I think also, I think Jacob has a good point where Mark Herring, this is a situation where he acts pretty unilaterally, and I think that's something that has been really off-putting to Republicans in General Assembly. And with this issue in particular, they definitely expressed that this is a policy that they weren't wild about, and I believe that was what was in Speaker Howell's press statement about this. But but looking back at his actions on gay marriage, I mean that was a very polarizing decision. And I think in terms framing this in terms of the election, I think these are still polarizing moves rather than working with across the aisle to come to a conclusion.
Yeah. Do you think? I mean, between Jacob, between the Medicaid expansion, and we can talk about that in a second, but between the Medicaid expansion, looking at the marriage equality, looking at this recent decision to support the Virginia Dream Act, I don't think there could ever be any more evidence that elections matter.
I mean, that's absolutely correct. It's the same thing that happened, well, I guess now about 6 years ago when Ken Cuccinelli won. Elections do have consequences, and the same sort of abilities that went with an Attorney General Cuccinelli are with an Attorney General Mark Herring, and especially given the margin of the race, I think it's really important that people also realize that every vote counts and can have big effects.
No, that's exactly right. So we're going to continue to follow this. Do you guys have an opinion one way or the other? I mean, Frank, you're at George Mason, and the Northern Virginia Community College, and certainly George Mason probably has more Dream Act students than maybe any other college, and I could be absolutely wrong about that, but that's my, that's certainly I think the prevailing understanding if you talk to people. Do you think that how will this impact further advocacy to sort of change the law permanently?
Yeah, I mean, I think if the Dreamers organization is smart about it, they'll really continue to push this next year in the General Assembly session. We were talking about earlier, this is a decision that could be changed with each Attorney General. I think there's going to be a real effort, particularly among students. I know the Dreamer organization at Mason is particularly strong, and getting this passed was an official stance of the university when we came down to work on Mason lobbies. So I mean, I really expect this to continue through the General Assembly, but I think it goes back to how are we going to get passed with bipartisan support. I'm not sure if the action by the Attorney General kind of helps that, because now this kind of looks like politically, this really looks like an issue that's supported by Democrats and framed in a democratic fashion rather than something that's looked at bipartisanly.
It's interesting to say that, and this is a question to you, Jacob. But if I'll recall that this is an issue that passed out of the Education Subcommittee unanimously, maybe with 1 or 2 votes shy of in the affirmative. Maybe there were a couple that voted no or didn't vote. But that's an overwhelmingly Republican committee. Some of the main sponsors on the bill are Delegate Joseph Yost and Delegate Tom Rust. I mean, they're clearly Republicans. I mean, there's not a lack of Republican support for this move. But Jacob, do you think that Republican support will just sort of go away?
I mean, I don't think it should. I think if they actually do support it, they would want to legislate it into a more long-term policy achievement. My issue is that in terms of when the House votes on things outside of committee, it becomes more politicized. Most of the work done in legislation, I mean, gets done in committee, and then once it's out of committee, even though they voted for it there, the leadership comes out against it, and so it doesn't pass out of the House. The issue is not necessarily the support in the Republican conference. The issue is support within the leadership. So, I think that they should continue to advocate for it if they do believe in the policy. I don't think this should make them. It's an achievement, but it's a temporary achievement. And I think if they want to ensure that this continues to be a part of the higher education system in Virginia, they should pass legislation to do so.
Well, thank you. Well, speaking of passing legislation, Frank, where do we sit on the budget passing?
Exactly where we sat, exactly where we've been sitting for a little while now, for I guess a couple months. Yeah, so we're still very much. What's that?
The budget has not passed.
No, yeah, the budget has not passed over the issue of Medicaid expansion. Just to kind of recap, Senate Democrats and the governor want to tie Medicaid expansion to the budget. And the House Republicans want to pass a budget without and consider Medicaid expansion in a different setting. And what's interesting is that I think the only change in the news otherwise is that, like last week, a poll came out from CNU that talked about, or that showed that majority of people were now opposed to Medicaid expansion as opposed to being supportive of it. I believe like a month ago or 2 months ago. And that was picked up on pretty quickly by both sides. Democrats said that it was an unfair poll. Quentin Kidd defended it in the newspaper just recently, and Republicans kind of used it as another tool to show that, at least try to show that they're winning this debate.
So to be fair to the poll, when people are on the losing edge of a poll, they usually criticize it.
Of course.
Right.
If you're on the winning side of a poll, you love it.
Mm-hmm.
Jacob, what do you there has been some criticism of the poll. What do you think?
So I'm not personally critical of the poll as itself. I think it's important that people realize that it is just one data point within a trend of other polls that have shown the opposite. So I'm not criticizing the methodology or what the poll says. I'm saying that in the broader context of other surveys and polls, I think you have to take it with a grain of salt. That being said, I would definitely, in terms of public perception of Medicaid expansion, if I were a Republican, I would be touting it just as I would if I were a Democrat if it said something else. So I just think it's important to notice the context, and also that the policy, when asked about in a certain way, can really impact how people respond to the question in terms of whether or not it's tied to the budget or shutting down the government potential first, or whether it's just Medicaid expansion on its own. So I just think context is really important when dealing with this issue.
And I think context is important as well. But I mean, here's another way to think about it. When the governor and Senate Democrats basically drew their line and said that this is an issue that we're going to take now instead of in some other manner later, you could very arguably say that the public didn't really know about a Medicaid expansion, didn't know about any potential compromises, that the public did not even know of it as an issue. And now, now the governor has visited, hospitals galore. I mean, he visits, a hospital every couple of days, it seems like. So is, members of his administration, so is the First Lady. And you also have now, you've got conservative voices airing TV ads in districts across the state. I mean, this is an issue where now people are starting to be educated, whereas once they probably didn't realize it was an actual issue. Do you think that poll reflects that at all? Go ahead, Jacob.
Well, I think Yeah, so I definitely think you're right. There has been a lot of spending in terms of advertising things on television, and a lot of it's been done by more conservative-leaning groups, and so yeah, I definitely do think that's people the information that people the information that people. Right, that's true. That's true. And I think part of that, part of the again, I'm just saying this because I think it's incredibly important that when you're talking about a single poll, it's just not reflective of necessarily an entire trend. I think that the arguments that people are making are more in terms of the Republican side. I think they're making the argument that it shouldn't be tied to. You don't see many Republicans making the argument that the Medicaid expansion is inherently bad. It's that it shouldn't be tied to the budget, and that's what's happening in a lot of these swing districts. People don't like the idea of shutting down the government, which is entirely appropriate, but they're not discussing the fact that Medicaid is funded within the budget. So Medicaid expansion is important to how hospitals are funded and how the general fund can be attributed to other services like infrastructure. So I think it's a matter of what media people are watching and how much is getting through to them and from what groups. I definitely do think you're right there.
Yeah, I mean, I think if anything, Republicans have done a really good job of tying Medicaid expansion to Obamacare, and I think this poll is kind of reflective of the emotion that comes with Obamacare, especially on the conservative side and in more rural districts around Virginia. I think this poll is kind of like a culmination of that.
No, I think that's an interesting point to say. It's like if the poll was testing Republicans' ability to tie Obama to the Medicaid expansion in Virginia,
yeah,
it did pretty effectively.
Right, and I think that message is much easier to convey to voters than explaining the coverage gap, explaining how hospitals are gonna be really hurt by not passing Medicaid expansion and the losing DISH funds. I mean, it's a more neatly packaged explanation of why we shouldn't have a Medicaid expansion rather than the argument for it.
No, I mean that's almost always the case. That saying no is easier than talking about the shades of gray that are reasonable.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
Well, let's move on from there and say, how is this budget impasse impacting our schools and the colleges and college students? Jacob, has William & Mary set its tuition?
I'm not certain of that right now, but I do know that in schools across the Commonwealth, it's really providing a greater degree of uncertainty, and so even if they have set their tuition, they may have to go back and revise it depending on what the situation is with the budget, and if they haven't already set it, then it's going to impact their decision where they are going to set it. So that's where I think it stands. I think the biggest issue is uncertainty, and that's the uncertainty that's also providing for in local governments and local school districts in addition to higher education.
No, and we can say very specifically that here are some of the places that have uncertainty.
Tom?
ODU has not set tuition. Bradford is not setting tuition. JMU is not setting tuition. Yeah. Virginia Tech. The list. UMW, Mary Washington, they're not setting tuition. And there have been very few schools. Longwood did. William & Mary did. When Jacob comes, up for air after finals, he'll see that.
Yeah.
UVA did, but there are a substantial number of our schools that have not, citing the budget impasse as the reason. Frank, do you think we're going to get to a point to where, the pressure from uncertainty from the colleges and the local governments and the K-12 schools, it's at what point is the pressure going to build to force one of these sides to duck and run?
Oh yeah, I don't think the pressure is going to come from uncertainty, at all. I think uncertainty is always almost the consequences of uncertainty are just so unclear that I don't think it's leverage enough on either side to really push something. I think it's really going to take some real like real feeling of the effects of not having a budget. And so I mean what Virginia could do is that they could authorize spending. I mean, or actually, I want to backtrack. I mean, there's still a lot of debate in the press about what Virginia can do. In terms of keeping things funded if they don't have a budget past July 1st, I believe. And there's still a lot of consequences. There's still a lot of things to determine about that. And
before we get to that, the question is, it's like, Jacob, are we going over the edge? Like, are we going to actually get to July 1 without a budget, do you think?
Right. So that's not, I mean, if that does happen, obviously that will be catastrophic. I don't see a situation where either side ducks. I think maybe, the governor would try to use his power as an executive to keep funding the government. I know he mentioned that today to the press. The issue is also not necessarily going over the edge. It depends on how close we get to the edge, how affect that, whether that affects our bond rating, whether that affects, whether or not businesses want to invest in Virginia. It's not necessarily going over the edge, but it's going to the brink, and we saw that on the national level a couple of years ago. So uncertainty can have an impact. It can have an economic impact, and it has an impact on how local governments how quickly they can fund these things if they don't know how much they're getting.
Yeah, the other thing that I wonder too, it's, if July 30 comes around and we still don't have a budget, it's not like the lights get cut off on July 1st in a lot of these state agencies that are longer funded. It takes weeks to shut agencies down. And one of the things I wonder from a leverage standpoint is if the governor's office will be able to issue guidance around shutting agencies down, and if that sort of ups the ante and ups the pressure on Republicans. Like, Frank, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think. Yeah, I think it will. I don't think the fear of the brink is something that's going to push. Is going to push people. I think it goes back to how this whole debate has been set up, which is not from an electoral standpoint, it isn't set up where there's a compromise where everyone feels good at the end. I really think that there's going to be a winner and a loser, and if Republicans ditch on that, I think there are going to be some consequences during an election year. So I think it will take either classes not being held, or teachers not being paid, or some kind of physical manifestation of this issue to push someone one way or the other.
Yeah, and that's a question I would have asked you both. But Jacob, what do you think it takes or it would take? I mean, forget the fact that people are in finals and they're about to go home for the summer, but what do you think it would take to get students on campus to recognize this as an issue and to act in one way or the other?
For students on campus, I think it's best reflected in what their tuition is, if the tuition gets revised, and how much it gets revised. If you see people getting notices that their financial aid may be cut depending on these things, I think that's how it's most likely going to affect them. Again, people are going home for the summer, but if people who are here for the summer doing research see things shutting down, that could have an effect. But again, and it's also true at the K through 12 level, because students are leaving for the summer, and by July 1st, most will be out of school. So the impact, I'm not sure how much a classroom level impact it will have, just given that most schools are out.
You agree, Frank? Do you agree?
Yeah. I mean, I think it will. I think changes in tuition. Or delay of say tuition will get some people's attention, but in terms of taking action, I mean, I really there just hasn't been that much of a populistic engagement in this issue so far. I mean, at least not to not in any ways that I think has been think I think it will take feeling the hurt from that to at least get people to notice. I think that's certainly true for students up in Northern Virginia who already feel disconnected from a lot of things that happen in the rest of the state.
Well, I think to both of your points, and we'll end on this. I mean, I think this is one of the reasons why this issue has been allowed to go on for so long with like no real resolution and just basically lines drawn on both sides is because it's an issue that one, it's become more of a national issue, but here at home, nobody's really informed about it.
Yeah.
Nobody, like, I mean, even now, people aren't aware what's happening and its impact on them. I mean, I think that, like, if there wasn't ever a reason to say that, I mean, if Dr. Kid's poll at CNU is sort of like the outlier, the fact that you can change the words just a few ways, the fact that it can give you such a different result, I mean, I think just shows you that the public is not educated about this issue. It's not tuned in. It doesn't really have an opinion. I mean, it's not a. Unfortunately, it goes on.
Yeah.
Yep.
Definitely.
So if only we had good exit music to say that the budget.
Sad song.
All right. Well, you guys have anything else for the week?
That's all I got from my side.
Yep. Same.
All right. Well, we'll see you again next month. Appreciate everybody for joining in, and we'll come back again in a month and see at the end of May if we're any closer to some sort of compromise, and we'll see how the schools continue to react on the tuition side, and who knows, maybe there'll be more news. So thank you, Frank. Thank you, Jacob.
Sure.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
We'll see you next time.